Imagine growing up believing that your entire existence had just one purpose: not to chase your dreams, not to discover who you are, but to save someone else's life. Now imagine that despite everything you sacrificed, that person still dies. What would happen to your identity? Who would you become when the only purpose you've ever known suddenly disappears? That's the heartbreaking question at the center of Netflix's The Map of Longing, a Spanish limited series based on Alice Kellen's best-selling novel. On the surface, it looks like another emotional romance, but beneath the love story is a much deeper exploration of grief, survivor's guilt, family trauma, and the painful journey of learning to live for yourself. This isn't just a story about falling in love, it's about learning how to live after loss. The series opens with one of the most unusual narrations you'll hear in a romantic drama. Greta tells us that unlike most people, she knows exactly why she was born. Not because she discovered her calling later in life, but because her parents created her for one specific reason: to save her older sister. Years earlier, Greta's sister Lucy was diagnosed with leukemia while she was still a toddler. Her only real chance of survival was a compatible stem cell donor. Hoping to save their daughter, Lucy's parents made an extraordinary decision. They had another child whose stem cells could be used in the treatment. That child was Greta. Thankfully, the transplant worked, and Lucy survived. The sisters grew up together, sharing a bond that went far beyond ordinary sibling love. They were best friends, confidants, and each other's emotional anchor. But there was another side to this story. Because so much of the family's attention revolved around Lucy's illness, Greta quietly grew up feeling invisible. While no one intended to neglect her, she often felt like the healthy child who simply had to cope on her own. Her grandfather became the one constant source of comfort in her life, offering the affection and reassurance she sometimes struggled to find elsewhere. Even as a child, Greta never questioned why she existed. She believed her life had meaning because it was tied to Lucy's survival. But that belief would eventually become the greatest burden she would ever carry. For years, it seemed as though the family's sacrifice had worked. Lucy lived. She laughed. She dreamed about the future. She and Greta imagined traveling the world together, creating a list of places they would one day visit. But illness has a cruel way of ignoring even the greatest acts of love. Years after the transplant, Lucy's immune system begins rejecting the donated stem cells. Her condition rapidly worsens, and despite every medical effort, she eventually passes away in her 20s. The loss devastates the entire family. But Greta experiences something even more complicated than grief. She feels responsible. Deep down, she believes she failed. The very reason she was brought into the world, to save Lucy, has slipped away. Logically, she knows she isn't to blame, but grief rarely listens to logic. Survivor's guilt has a way of rewriting reality, convincing people they're responsible for outcomes they could never control. And that's exactly what happens to Greta. Instead of moving forward, she becomes emotionally frozen. The series doesn't only focus on Greta's pain, it quietly shows how grief fractures an entire family. Her mother, Rosie, barely leaves the house. She spends her days staring blankly at the television, trapped in a depression so deep that even ordinary routines feel impossible. Her father, Jacobo, copes in the opposite way. He throws himself into work, burying every emotion beneath endless hours of the office. To outsiders, he seems to be functioning. In reality, he's simply avoiding the pain waiting for him at home. Neither response is presented as right or wrong. There's simply two different ways people survive unbearable loss. Greta, meanwhile, drifts through her own days without direction. She works, goes home, and carries the weight of Lucy Fagson's everywhere she goes. Even her casual relationships feel empty, as though she's only pretending to participate in a life that no longer feels like her own. The world keeps moving, but Greta doesn't. Then, on what would have been Lucy's birthday, everything changes. Greta visits her sister's favorite burger restaurant to honor her memory. It's a quiet ritual, one that allows her to feel close to Lucy for just a little while longer. But she isn't alone for long. A young man approaches her carrying a wooden box. His name is Will Tucker. Greta has never seen him before, yet he calmly tells her something almost impossible to believe. He knew Lucy. Even more surprising, he explains that Lucy left strict instructions for him to deliver the box to Greta on the first birthday after her death. Naturally, Greta is suspicious. If Will was really such an important part of Lucy's life, why had she never heard his name? Why would her sister trust a complete stranger with something so deeply personal? Will refuses to answer. Instead, he places the mysterious box in front of her. Carved into the lid are 4 simple words. Inside are carefully numbered compartments, each containing a challenge Lucy created before she died. There are also letters, one for Greta and one for Will. Greta can barely bring herself to read her sister's words. The grief is still too raw. Will quietly reads his own letter, then explains Lucy's final wish. Greta must complete every challenge, and he has promised Lucy that he'll make sure she does. It's an extraordinary request, one that Greta immediately rejects. She doesn't want games. She doesn't want life lessons. Most of all, she doesn't want a stranger telling her how to grieve. So she walks away. Or at least, she tries to. Although Greta leaves the restaurant determined to ignore the mysterious box, Lucy's plan has already begun working. Over the following days, Greta's carefully controlled world starts falling apart. She learns that her beloved grandfather is leaving town to begin a new chapter of his own. The one person who has always been her emotional refuge is moving away. Suddenly, Greta feels even more alone than before. That loneliness eventually pushes her towards Will again. She finds him at the cafe where he works and demands the box back. Will refuses. Not because he wants to control her, but because he made a promise to Lucy. If Greta isn't willing to commit to the game, he won't hand it over. Frustrated, Greta tells him to throw it away. To her surprise, he actually does. The wooden box lands in a trash bin. For a split second, Greta watches it disappear. And then instinct takes over. She rushes toward the bin, desperate to retrieve it. In that single moment, something important changes. For the first time since Lucy's death, Greta isn't reacting out of grief. She's reacting out of hope. A tiny part of her still wants to believe her sister left behind something worth discovering. And that's exactly what Lucy was counting on. As Greta reluctantly agrees to play Lucy's strange game, she has no idea that every challenge has been carefully designed to change her life forever. But what she doesn't know is that the map of longing isn't really about completing tasks. It's about confronting the truths she spent years running from. And the quiet stranger standing beside her may be carrying secrets just as painful as her own.
Greta reluctantly agrees to play Lucy's map of longing, believing it's just a series of meaningless tasks. But Lucy had planned every challenge with one purpose: to help her sister learn how to live again. The first task sends Greta to a grief support group, where she realizes she's not the only person struggling to let go. Slowly, she begins opening up about the pain she's been hiding. Meanwhile, Will becomes more than just Lucy's messenger. He teaches Greta how to drive, encourages her to create a bucket list, and even takes her hiking into the Pyrenees. Each challenge pushes Greta a little further outside the life that grief had trapped her in. As they spend more time together, the chemistry between them becomes impossible to ignore. Their playful arguments slowly turn into genuine affection. But Will keeps avoiding questions about his own life. He admits he once lived in Wales and came from a wealthy family, but refuses to explain why he now lives alone in a caravan and works as a bartender. Greta senses that he's hiding something. And she's right. Because the closer they become, the closer Will gets to a secret that could destroy everything between them. Eventually, Will decides Greta deserves the truth. He reveals that years ago he was arrogant, selfish, and reckless. He cheated on his girlfriend, surrounded himself with toxic friends, and believed money and status mattered more than anything else. Then one reckless street race changed his life forever. Will crashed his car, survived the accident, but his best friend, Juan, died. Crushed by guilt, Will abandoned his old life and spent years punishing himself. During his recovery in the hospital, he unexpectedly reunited with Lucy, who had once defended him as a child when he was bullied. Lucy became his closest friend. Seeing the goodness still hidden inside him, she asked him to help Greta after her death. Instead of bringing Greta closer, Will's confession pushes her away. She feels betrayed that he hid such a huge part of his past. But while Greta struggles to forgive him, Lucy's final challenges continue changing everyone around her. Her mother slowly begins healing. Her father admits his marriage is falling apart. Greta reconciles with her former best friend Olivia, and finally realizes something she has never believed before. She was never born only to save Lucy. She deserves a life of her own. The final challenge contains Lucy's greatest gift. She leaves Greta money she secretly saved over the years and asks her to travel the world, to experience the life Lucy never had the chance to live. Greta invites Will to come with her, But before they can leave, Will must finally face the consequences of his past. He apologizes to Juan's parents, visits his friend's grave, and begins forgiving himself for the accident that has haunted him for years. Greta also reaches a turning point. While traveling through Europe, she earns an opportunity to study in Rome, and for the first time starts making decisions based on what she wants, not what grief expects from her. The most emotional moment comes when Greta reads Lucy's final letter. In her imagination, she sees Lucy one last time. Instead of asking Greta to keep holding on, Lucy tells her it's finally time to let go. Greta tearfully says goodbye, accepting that loving someone doesn't mean you can never move forward. Months later, on Lucy's death anniversary, Will surprises Greta in Vienna. Both have changed. Both have healed. This time, their relationship isn't built on grief or guilt, but on hope. The series ends with Greta thanking Lucy for giving her one final adventure. Not an adventure across Europe, but the journey back to herself. The Map of Longing is much more than a romance. It's a story about survivor's guilt, forgiveness, family, and learning that life doesn't end when someone you love is gone. Lucy may have died in the very first episode, but her final game becomes the reason everyone around her begins living again.